So, when I was around 11 years old, my family moved to a new house on the other side of town. Since I was moving to a different school district, I had to switch schools, which did not excite me at all. I was dreading the thought of meeting new teachers and new friends, but I had no say in the matter and had to go along with the move whether I liked it or not. My first year at the school was tough, and it took some time for me to adjust to my new life. I made a few new friends, and one of those friends was another young girl we will call Camille. Camille and I had a lot of things in common, and we spent a lot of time together in and out of school. After all, she only lived a few houses down from me. Most days after school, Camille would come over to my house, and we would do homework together and play. Sometimes, if it was okay with her mom, she would have dinner at my house. It's fair to say that Camille and I were best friends at that point. We never hung out at her house, and whenever I asked her why we always hung out at my house, she would always say that it was because my house was nicer. If I'm being honest, the house I lived in was nicer, but I didn't necessarily think her house looked that bad. I could tell that talking about her house was a sore topic for Camille, so I never brought it up again. Camille lived in her house with just her mom and her brother. She said that her dad had left the year before, and she hadn't seen or spoken to him since. I could tell it made her sad to speak about her dad, so we hardly ever spoke about him. One day, my mom asked Camille's mom if we could hang out at their house instead because half of our house would be under construction, and my parents didn't want Camille and me to get hurt while the house was being worked on. Her mom agreed to have me over for that entire week after school. I remember the first day going to Camille's house. The house was very messy, and there was a very weird smell that hit me in the face when I walked in. The house was the very opposite of the house my family and I lived in. I could tell that Camille was embarrassed by the condition of their home, and to make her feel more comfortable, I told her I loved her home. Her mother was nice as usual, and she cooked for us, but I didn't really eat the food. Her brother didn't speak a word, he just ate his food quickly and went back to his room to play video games. After she ate, Camille and I went to her bedroom where we hung out and listened to music. Suddenly the music stopped, and Camille asked me how good I was at keeping a secret. Of course, I told her I was good at keeping secrets, and she made me pinky swear that I wouldn't tell anyone what she was about to share with me next. I couldn't have imagined what Camille would say next, and sometimes I wonder if it would have been better not to know. She told me that her father didn't actually leave her, her mom, and her brother. She said he was, in fact, still in the house. I was confused. Why would my best friend make up a lie about her father leaving? She asked me if I wanted to see him, and of course, by that time, curiosity had set in. She said that we had to be really quiet because her father was in the basement of their home. I thought maybe her father was sleeping. We tiptoed our way past the living room where Camille's mom watched a loud TV program. She didn't even see us walk by. Once in the basement, the awful smell was stronger. It was the smell of death. I covered my nose and mouth as Camille walked me over to an object covered with a sheet, and what I saw when she pulled back the sheet left me horrified. I let out a loud scream, which caused Camille's mom to run from upstairs to the basement. Camille's mom was visibly upset, and she grabbed Camille by the hair and told her to get upstairs immediately. She ordered me to leave immediately, and without hesitation, I bolted out of their house, leaving everything I had brought with me. I ran home quickly and didn't stop until I was in the arms of my mother. I was crying uncontrollably, and my mother was finally able to pry the encounter out of me. When I told my mom what I saw, she immediately dialed 911. When the police came, my mother had me explain what I had seen. They quickly made their way to Camille's house. By the time the police arrived, Camille, her mom, and her brother were all gone. The police did make their way to the basement, though, where they found exactly what I told them they would find. What they found was Camille's father, covered in a blanket. That evening, our neighborhood was swarmed with police cars and crime scene investigators. I was being asked the same questions a million times by different people. The entire ordeal that night was so traumatizing. I remember my mom taking me to see a child psychologist soon after that, and I had to take some time off from school. I never saw Camille again after that day. I know that the police finally caught her family a few states away several weeks later. Her mom was arrested for killing her father. When the facts came to light, I found out that Camille's dad was abusive to her mom, and her brother, and one night he came home drunk and was acting violently toward them, and that's when her mom decided that she had to put a stop to the abuse, and she took matters into her own hands. When Camille took me to the basement, it had been 2 weeks since her mom had shot him. I felt so horrible for Camille and her family and wondered how she was coping with everything that happened. In the end, I think she and her brother went into foster care, and her mom was sent to prison. Sometimes I wonder how this story would have ended if Camille hadn't taken me down to the basement that day. That was a pretty traumatizing experience for me, one that will unfortunately live with me forever. One summer, I decided to work as a counselor at a youth camp to make some extra money. The job wasn't hard, and I enjoyed it very much. It prompted me to switch my major from political science to education, and I had decided that my life's mission was to become a teacher. Most of the kids at the camp were all right, some more than others. There was one boy, though, who always felt the need to challenge authority. Let's call him Ricky. Ricky was very big for his age, and he towered over me. At the time, I was 5 feet 2 inches, and he was maybe 6 foot 2. He had a potty mouth, and I heard rumors that he was in a gang. This program was created to help kids from disadvantaged backgrounds who had behavioral problems. At the other camps I had worked at in the past, Ricky would have been kicked out, but this camp was more lenient because of the purpose behind it. Anyway, one day Ricky was being extra difficult, and another of the program directors, who we will call Mr. Chapman, got a bit stern with Ricky. Like I said, Ricky didn't respect authority, so naturally, it made him upset to be called out by Mr. Chapman. Ricky started becoming aggressive with Mr. Chapman and proceeded to punch him. Mr. Chapman grabbed Ricky and slammed him to the ground and held him down while I called the police. Ricky was on the ground, yelling to be let go, but Mr. Chapman held him in place until the police arrived. I could tell that Ricky's pride took a hit that day, which angered him. While on the ground, Ricky made threats to Mr. Chapman, who sort of shrugged them off. In that moment, I remembered the rumors that Ricky was in a gang, and it made me feel a bit uneasy. The police arrived, and Ricky was taken away. Needless to say, he was removed from the program immediately. About a week later, the camp had come to an end. We had just ended our farewell party, and said goodbye to all the kids. All the counselors and directors stayed behind to help clean up. Once we were finished, we shut off the lights and walked to the parking lot together and began getting into our cars. The parking lot was dark, and I noticed that at the very end of the parking lot, there was a lone car with blacked out windows. I had just gotten into my car and locked the doors when I heard screeching tires followed by gunshots. I panicked and decided to hide in place, so I ducked down in my car while the shots rang out. I could hear some of my coworkers screaming. I had no idea if any of them had been hit, and I was terrified to look. After a few seconds, the car sped away, and I finally felt safe to sit up straight and look. I could barely see anything in the darkness, but I managed to fumble for my phone to call for help. I could hear sirens in the distance, and as they approached, I felt a sense of comfort. There was a helicopter flying overhead as well as an ambulance on the scene. The police approached my car and told me it was safe for me to come out. While I was in the ambulance being assessed, I noticed that all of my coworkers were okay except for one, Mr. Chapman. I received news that he hadn't made it, and I immediately broke down into tears. I was also told that a teenage boy was also hit and hadn't made it either. I was confused because all of the kids had left the camp more than 30 minutes before the shooting even started. I was asked to identify the teenager, and I was shocked when I saw that it was Ricky. Ricky had returned that night with his friends to harm Mr. Chapman, and although they were successful, Ricky had also met his demise that night. Finding this information out was very hard to come to terms with, and I felt horrible. What happened that night should have never happened. Mr. Chapman was meant to continue his work in the community helping the youth, and Ricky was meant to continue his education and working towards success, but instead, their goals had been cut short that night. The other people who helped Ricky carry out his plan were never found and brought to justice, but when I think about them, I hope that they have turned their lives around, and I am grateful that I get to wake up every day and continue to help the youth in the community while hoping to save someone from ending up like Ricky. This story I am going to share with you happened many years ago, and since I don't have all the details, I will keep it short. One day, my brother and I decided to take a shortcut home from school through a wooded area. We had stayed at the school a little later than usual to play basketball with friends, and this shortcut was the only way we could guarantee we would get home before dark, so we decided to take it. We had taken this shortcut many times before and had never seen anything out of the ordinary before. Actually, we had never even seen another person in this wooded area before, only the occasional wild animal. This day was different, though. We saw two men struggling to carry something wrapped in a black tarp. My brother grabbed my arm and stopped me from moving forward. He motioned for me to duck down behind a tree, and I did. We hid in place for a few minutes until the two men threw the tarp down and lit the tarp and whatever it was covering on fire. We waited a few minutes for them to leave, and then we continued our walk cautiously. We could see beyond the wooded area, the two men leaving in a pickup truck, and as we ran by the fire, we could see a foot hanging from beneath the charred tarp. We ran home and called the cops who showed up at our house. We told them what we saw, and they sent officers and firefighters to the fire. They took our statements and returned a few days later to ask additional questions, but we couldn't give them much information because we didn't know how the guys looked. They had been too far away from us for us to have gotten a good description of their faces. We remembered their truck being a black truck but couldn't say what the make and model was. We felt useless because we couldn't offer much helpful information to help find whoever had harmed and burned a young mother of 3. We don't really know what happened after that, but we hope some sort of justice was served. This is Terribly Spooked. If you dare, subscribe now.